Hello everyone, my name is Maia. Along with my classmates Beletra Thomas and Jeremiah Trombley, I would like to thank you for joining us today as we discuss our campaign proposal for Evolve USA. This campaign is part of our capstone project to graduate with a Master's in Strategic PR from the George Washington University. The proposal is actually presented as a plan that aspires to unite Americans for safer and more responsible gun ownership. Let's go ahead and get started then. So who is Evolve? Well, this fairly recently created organization, actually created in 2013 by John and Rebecca Bond, is aspiring to solely focus on promoting personal decisions about gun safety. Some of you might be familiar with Evolve. The organization has earned a reputation for its viral and humoristic videos that actually allow for lighter conversations about a topic otherwise very emotionally loaded. This is just one way Evolve has been fighting to unite Americans around the topic of safety and responsible ownership when it comes to guns. Before we delve more on our proposed approach to shifting the gun debate to focus solely on safety, let's first take a look at the current climate that warrants such a campaign. So, simply put, when we take a look at other developed countries where comparable rates of citizens own guns, America has some of the highest gun incident rates. In 2015 alone, there were over 50,000 registered gun incidents in the U.S. On one hand, high-profile mass shootings have prompted citizens to question whether the current policies in place grant them the safety they need. On another hand, a large number of Americans are worried about potentially being denied their Second Amendment rights at some point. This has prompted a heated debate on the topic, and for years, partisanship has gridlocked any efforts to limit the number of incidents, despite the attempts from various organizations to propose reforms and changes in policies. Research also proved that current conversations on gun control are not only largely divided by party lines, but also deeply rooted in fears. So the question is, where does Evolve stand in all of this? Well, Evolve founders do not care about political affiliations, that's for sure. The organization recognizes, however, that in order to be heard in this highly complex public debate sphere regarding gun ownership, it just needs to find a middle ground void of any emotion where the two sides, meaning pro-gun control advocates and anti-gun control advocates, can meet. Easier said than done, right? As Evolve states in most of its public-facing content, safety is not a side, and it comes first. Trying to avoid to accidentally put holes in people, in furniture, in pizza should just be a goal for every gun-owning American. It is their responsibility. So Evolve's main aspiration is to be the third voice and center the debate. However, the organization has to fight to have its voice heard when it faces other organizations who have a far wider reach and much deeper pockets. So how will Evolve do that? Well, for this campaign, we have developed a few goals and objectives that will help that. First, we will shift the gun control debate to an inclusive middle ground. This will be achieved by finding ways to increase the rates of trackable public conversations about safety by 10%. This will include both social and traditional media conversations, as well as forums and chat groups. We will also try to build support for a universal background check. By increasing background check support on both sides of the spectrum, we will actually help make sure that policymakers are seeing that the American public wants this. Currently, 88% of Democrats and 79% of Republicans actually support expanded background checks. Yet, no policy or measure has been put in place to enforce such measure. Finally, we will work to increase awareness of the organization as well as its mission. We will achieve that by increasing the number of supporters who take the pledge to not put accidental holes in things and people. Now, in order to reach those goals and those objectives, we have developed a strategy that's built around the 2016 presidential election cycle, because it allows a platform to actually get Evolve's voice heard. By leveraging conversations that are already happening, Evolve will force active listeners to take politics out of the topic. With so many Americans supporting expanded background checks already, it is baffling that there hasn't been any policies to date that has been developed to enforce this actually. So calling out politicians on their views on that specific topic, for examples, will help draw a starker contrast between the usual bipartisan approach to the issue and the increased focus on safe and responsible ownership. Also, the campaign team will tag along prominent political conversations online and offline to disseminate facts about where areas of compromise already exist. This will allow the organization to frame the discussions and reach an audience whose attention is already captured. Now on to the campaign messaging. The most important of all is gun safety. We will use the slogan, "Clear it, check it, lock it," as many times as needed to remind folks about the measures that they need to take in order to avoid accidents. Following closely is responsible gun ownership. Americans have a tight bond with their communities, so it is imperative that we make sure that every individual understands that the part they play in keeping our communities safe. Universal background check could probably mitigate the risk for a gun to end in the wrong hands. As Evolve states on its website, no sane American will ever give a gun to a mentally ill individual, right? Why then sell guns to the mentally ill? And then finally, we should all be proud to be Americans and proud of our rights. So, Evolve will play its unifying role and will make sure that it develops strategic partnerships with the organizations who can actually meet on a middle ground. This leads us to our next point, which are the tactics that the campaign team has developed in order to achieve maximum impact and garner as much coverage as possible. The team will work with like-minded organizations, as well as pro-gun control advocates and anti-gun control advocates, to foster a collaborative environment where a middle ground can be found. Additionally, the team has developed a list of key hashtags to use throughout the 2016 election campaigns, including the ones that are dedicated to ask only gun-related questions to both political parties. This will allow Evolve to not only disseminate its messages, but also monitor the progression of the conversation shifting from a bipartisan stance to an objective analysis of American safety concerns. The campaign timeline, as we discussed earlier, will be built around the presidential election cycle, with the research phase starting 2 to 3 months before it launches and going on in order to constantly evaluate the tactics and refine the messages. To measure the campaign's success, we will first take a look at the outputs by monitoring daily changes in social media traffic and website traffic. The number of engagement in Facebook and Twitter, as well as how often Evolve gets mentioned in online forums, panels, local events, and in the media, will also give us an idea of what Evolve's share of voice becomes as the campaign progresses. Then, we will examine the outtakes from the tactics. Since gun ownership is an extremely sensitive topic, it is important to note whether the public is connecting with the messages and understanding the campaign messaging in general. We will then observe the media coverage of the campaign and figure out whether the tone was neutral or positive or negative in general. Ultimately, The desired outcome of this campaign is to notice an increased focus on safety and responsible gun ownership in the social conversations that are happening around gun and gun control in general. By taking a hard look at the outputs, the outtakes, and the outcome of this campaign, and measuring it against the goals and the objectives that we set forth before we started this campaign, we will then be able to determine whether this campaign was a success or whether we needed to refine the strategy and the methodology that we employed in order to launch it. This will conclude our presentation on Evolve USA, the organization that actually will unite Americans on the topic of gun, safer guns, and responsible gun ownership in America.